Hi there, my name is Hannah Phillips, and welcome to the 6th episode of Under the Brolly Season 2. This podcast aims to educate and inform the wider community about the lesser-known sexualities, gender identities, and expressions, kinks, and fetishes, collectively known as LGBT+. MyUmbrella LGBT+ is a volunteer-led project of Reading Pride launched in 2015 to raise awareness of these identities. MyUmbrella can be reached in a number of ways, such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or via our contact form on our website. Details are on the screen below. In this episode, we'll be joined with two special guests talking about LGBT plus inclusion in sport. This includes Tommy Snipes, chair of Reading Renegades Rugby Football Club, coming in direct the Touch My Brum rugby tournament. Tommy, please tell us a little bit about yourself and the Reading Renegades.
Hi Hannah, thank you so much for having me today. Hopefully you can hear me. Apologies if it's a bit loud. So I am the chairperson of the Reading Renegades, have been since last summer. We are an inclusive rugby club based in Reading, as the name would suggest, and we're inclusive for all people, but we particularly cater to the LGBT plus community to create a safe space for that community to enjoy rugby and get involved in rugby.
Thank you so much, Tommy. Next, we have Sophie Cook, a writer, speaker, broadcaster, and photographer, best known for being the first transgender woman to work in football's Premier League as club photographer for AFC Bournemouth, following her transition in the summer of 2015. Sophie, please tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
I think you pretty much said everything I do there, but I've been involved in campaigning for better representation of minorities within football ever since I came out 6 years ago. Heavily involved in fighting homophobia, biphobia and transphobia within the game, as well as fighting racism. At the same time, I travel all over. Well, before COVID, I was traveling all over Europe, speaking at conferences about mental health, because the two things are so inextricably linked, I think. But it's great to be getting back out there, and it's great to be actually seeing people again. We've just launched a new campaign yesterday with Bristol Rovers Football Club, which is called My Rovers, My Shirt, which just tries to break down the stereotype that football is a sport for white middle-aged men, and it's just about getting those messages out there and letting people see what's actually going on in the world around them.
Thank you, Sophie. Now we'll move on to the first topic of the show, inclusive rugby. Tommy, what makes rugby a much more inclusive sport compared to football?
That's a really good question. I think part of it is because of the nature of the game itself, in that we have lots of different positions that are suitable for all sorts of different players of sort of many different shapes and sizes. So if you look at sort of a prop who is typically a larger player in comparison to a winger who could be much more sort of sprightly and fast, I think that opens it up as a sport which enables inclusion. I also think there's a lot to be said around the values within rugby itself, and sort of the culture within rugby. I think obviously there's still issues in terms of sort of lad culture, I suppose, but I think just the very nature of rugby enables it to be a more inclusive sport. And also there's been a lot of work by various people who have helped drive forward inclusion in the sport. So if we look at the IGR, International Gay Rugby, they've done a lot to create safe spaces for the LGBT plus community in rugby. Driving it forward not only for the clubs that operate as part of the IGR, but also for some of the more mainstream clubs, and supporting inclusion more widely. I mean, even today, I'm here at an IGR tournament with loads of other IGR clubs, and it's great that there are just so many people here in this LGBT plus friendly space playing rugby.
Thank you, Tommy. Sophie, is there anything you would like to add?
First of all, I disagree with the fact that rugby is more inclusive than football because, traditionally football had its issues, but over the last 6 years since I came out, pretty much every football team in the country now has an LGBT supporters group. We had very visible signs of support, like Harry Kane wearing the rainbow armband at the Euro 2000s. And I know so many people at all levels of the game, from non-league all the way up to FIFA. And FIFA it was who actually invited me out to Moscow to speak to Russian LGBT activists during the World Cup in 2018. There's so many people throughout the game doing so much work to break down prejudice, whether it's due to someone's sexuality, their gender identity, their race or religion. And yet sort of football always gets this negative press. I would disagree that football is less inclusive, but I just think that we're all working on so many things at the same time. Just we're all trying to make the world a better place, and I think it's important that we all work together towards that goal.
Yeah, just to add on to what Sophie said, I mean, I think, the England team in particular in the recent Euros, they've, been very clearly trying to sort of drive forward inclusion. So, I would agree with you, Sophie, on that. I mean, I can't speak much to football because I'm not involved in football, really. But, just looking at, role models in our England team in the recent Euros, it's quite clear that there is a drive forward for inclusion in football as well.
Let's face it, the England team in this last tournament, they stood up against child poverty, they stood up against racism, they stood up against homophobia. And let's face it, they seem to be doing a better job than 9 out of 10 politicians nowadays at actually highlighting the social injustices within our society. The fact that it takes a 19-year-old kid from Manchester to point out to the government that kids need feeding, I think is a shocking indictment on the society that we live in nowadays.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you, Tommy. Before moving on to football, we cannot forget Gareth Thomas CBE, nicknamed Alfie. Thomas is a Welsh former professional rugby player who represented Wales in both the Rugby Union and Rugby League. With 100 test match appearances, he was the most capped Welsh Rugby Union player until he was overtaken by Stephen Jones in September 2011. He is currently ranked 14th amongst the international try scorers and is the third highest Wales try scorer behind Shane Williams and George North. He has also won 4 Rugby League caps for Wales, scoring 3 tries. Thomas came out as gay in December 2009. The following year, he was voted the most influential gay person in the UK in The Independent on Sunday Pink List and received Stonewall's Hero of the Year award. Thomas was assaulted on the 17th of November 2018 in Cardiff because of his sexuality. A year later, Thomas announced on the 14th of September 2019 that he is HIV positive with undetectable status. On the following day, he competed in the Ironman Welsh event in Tenby, having vowed to break the stigma around the illness.
Gareth Thomas thing is interesting. I think especially when it came to the HIV sort of disclosure a couple of years ago, because if I recall correctly, there was almost a pressure to come out as HIV positive because I think he was going to be outed by the press if he didn't. And if I recall correctly, he said something along the lines of it was his right to tell his family and not others. And I do find it interesting how the press and has this real interest in LGBT plus sports people and their private lives that obviously all people in sort of public eye have that sort of interest, but I feel like there's this heightened interest and almost this bias towards trying to tell these what people might perceive as negative stories about these people. But yeah, just my thoughts.
I mean, one of the biggest problems with the media in this country is that they wrap voyeurism up as news. And I remember when I came out, I had a certain newspaper that is not very popular on Merseyside, the Sun, chasing me for months trying to get my story. And there's no way I was going to talk to the Sun. And eventually I actually had to, being an ex-newspaper editor, I sat down with a journalist that I knew, and we wrote my story and we controlled it and we put it out there. So it didn't include anything about my surgical status. It didn't include anything about my sexuality. It didn't include anything about my kids. So I was able to really control the story. The only problem is that they use these really horrible pictures of me that keep trotting back year after year. Obviously, like I'm like this today, but I'm just chill. Yeah, it's all right for you. You're in the middle of a field somewhere.
Yeah, I know. Well, there's like not weird, but like weird people like walking past me, like, so trying to like hide them from the view. But I think what you said about the voyeurism is really true, actually, because, you know, what I think it just creates this culture where people don't want to come out or don't want to be their authentic selves, because as soon as they do, you know, the papers are going to jump on it. People are going to jump on it, and it has to be this big thing, you know, coming out, being who you are doesn't have to be this big deal that everyone absolutely needs to know. And I think, you know, that's a real barrier to driving inclusion in sport, is this sense that people have to publicly come out and, you know, it has to be this big issue where everyone's asking about your private life. Yeah, I'm sorry you had to go through that. That's awful.
I mean, for the last 6 years, virtually every interview I've done has asked me when a gay player is going to come out in football, and I now have a totally different answer to that than I did at the start of the 6 years, because now my answer is actually it's totally irrelevant now, because for me, the fact that there's a gay player on the pitch makes no difference. For me, that the real difference is the fact that LGBT fans can feel comfortable going to football matches, can feel comfortable being on the terrace, can be comfortable holding up a rainbow flag. I mean, I was holding a trans pride flag in the World Cup semi-final match in Moscow. Admittedly, there was a Russian Secret Service guy sat next to me, and it did give me some funny looks occasionally. But the thing is, for me, that's the thing that has a real impact on people's lives, not whether a player's gay or not, because again, that veers over into that idea of voyeurism. I mean, I've always said that when a player comes out, it can't be a press conference, it can't be a big media song and dance. It should be like that American footballer did the other week. It's like, take a selfie, here's me and my boyfriend, guess what? Because let's face it, when you come out, it's a deeply personal experience, and it needs to be done on your time schedule, when you're ready, and in the way that you feel comfortable with. It's not a big media circus. But the problem is, the first gay player that comes out isn't just going to have to carry on playing football. They're going to be expected to be a role model from day one. They're going to be expected to be a spokesperson from day one. And the problem is, I've worked with a lot of footballers over the last 20 years, and some of them are very eloquent. Some of them aren't. And if it's one of the less eloquent one that comes out as gay and is then expected to go on every single TV chat show in the world, that guy is really going to struggle. I mean, it's also important to remember that when we talk about a gay player coming out, we are talking about the men's game, because there are plenty of out and proud LGBT women within women's football. And also, I manage a LGBT team called Rainbow Rovers, and we're a mixed gender team. We're made up of predominantly gay guys, but we've got some trans women in the team, got some trans guys, some gay women, and we've played our first match back in 2019 and took on the team of ex-Premier League pros, and we beat them 5-2, which was brilliant. We scored the goal in the first minute and really put the wind up them. But we've got the second game coming up in a few weeks' time on August the 7th here in Brighton. And once again, it will be a team of LGBT people taking on a team of pros. And I remember before the game last time, I walked into the changing room and I said to them, they're all out there sort of wondering when the first gay player is going to come out. And I'm looking at a room full of them. Let's go out there and show them what we can do. And admittedly, when we stuffed them 5-2, I walked into the changing room afterwards and went, you lot played like a bunch of gays. And yeah, I think we did. I think we showed them what we could do.
That's amazing. I love that. That's an amazing story. Brilliant.
Thank you. Now we move on to Homo, bi, transphobia in football. Anti-discrimination campaign groups are urging the Football Association to reconsider its assessment on the phrase "rent boy" after guidance was issued to a country FA that does not meet the criteria of the governing body uses to determine homophobic language. In October, a local league match in North Somerset was abandoned in the 80th minute when one team walked off the pitch after the offensive assault, which was directed at one of their players by an opponent. The abandonment of the game between AFC Shipman and Portishead Town, a team made national headlines. The Football Association states, "As a sport and industry, football continues to embrace the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community, and there is still more to do to stop these forms of discriminatory abuse. Groups and individuals tackling homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia in the game engage regularly and establish lobby groups like Stonewall, coupled with the emergence of its vibrant fans movement consisting of LGBT and T groups linked to professional clubs, means there is more visibility around this area than ever before." Sophie, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I remember the story. Because one of the players called another one a rent boy, didn't he? And the guidance said that wasn't homophobic abuse, which I would counter that it probably is. But the problem is, let's face it, we live in a society where the Prime Minister thinks it's okay to use words like bum boys and pickaninnies and things like this. So it's we've got a problem whereby people in charge don't always take language seriously. And the thing is, with any kind of hate speech, it's not just that single incident, especially if you're on the receiving end of it. And this is something that trans people know only too well. Misgendering isn't a single word now. It's that word 10 times a day. It's that word 50 times this week, 100 times that month, 1,000 times this year. And it just chips away at your self-esteem and your self-confidence and your self-worth and has a massive impact on your mental health. Now, I'm pretty sure that in the example of that football match, the abuse wasn't directed towards a gay player. It was just used as an insult. And let's face it, there are so many times in the English language where statements like, "Oh, it's so gay," or "don't be a puff," are bandied around as insults. But again, it's that problem of language, and it's that problem about education to let people know that you know what, this is unacceptable, because so many of the people, especially with terms like, we saw it recently with a golfer who missed a putt and then turned around and called himself a faggot. And it was broadcast live around the world. And he didn't even realize that he'd said anything wrong. And it's like, living in 2021, you'd like to think that people have woken up a bit, but obviously there's quite a few out there that are still struggling to make sense of it all. But I think what we need to do is we need to ensure that there's an open and honest dialogue, and we need to make sure that some of this language is sort of rightly called out for what it is, because it's important that all of us stand up against prejudice wherever we hear it and whoever it's against. It's not up to trans people to fight transphobia. It's not up to gay people to fight homophobia. It's not up to people of colour to fight racism. We've all got to stand united against all of them. And until we do that, we're always going to struggle with this divide and conquer that is going on in so many areas of society at the moment.
Yeah, Sophie, just what you were saying there around it's not up to gay people to fight homophobia and fight biphobia, trans people to fight transphobia, I think is really important. In fact, it goes to speak to some of the things that we were discussing earlier around, it's not, down to gay people to be the role models. When the first gay footballer comes out, they shouldn't be expected to be the role model. In fact, any of our existing players can be role models for inclusion in sport. And we need to sort of decrease almost the burden that's being put on these groups to advocate for themselves, because if anything, you're just sort of deepening inequality if you're putting on, not only are they having to deal with all the, discriminatory, hateful, abusive behaviour, but then also have to put in the energy to actually advocate for themselves and change it for themselves. It's a lot, basically. That's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you, Sophie and Tommy. To know more about the use of language, see episode 3 shown in the top right-hand corner. Justin Fashanu was an English footballer who played for a variety of clubs between 1978 and 1997, before I was born. He was known by his early clubs to be gay and came out publicly later in his career, becoming the first professional footballer to be openly gay. He was also the first black footballer to command a 100 million transfer fee, with his transfer from Norwich to Nottingham Forest in 1981, but had little success as a player afterwards, although he continued to play at senior level until 1994. After moving to the United States in 1998, he was questioned by police when a 17-year-old boy accused him of sexual assault. He was charged and an arrest warrant for him was issued in Howard County, Maryland, on the 3rd of April 1998, but he had already left his flat. According to his suicide note, fearing he would not get a fair trial because of his homosexuality, he fled to England, where he killed himself in London in May 1998. According to his suicide note, stated that sex was consensual. In 2020, Fashanu was inducted to the National Football Museum Hall of Fame. Sophie, what do you feel about this?
Justin, I remember watching Justin Fashanu play back in the 80s, and I mean, at the time I was in the Royal Air Force, and it was illegal to be LGBT in the armed forces at the time. We had Section 28 in the schools, which prohibited the promotion of homosexuality and other pretend lifestyles as being valid. We lived in a society where Saturday night primetime television quite often involved homophobic, transphobic characters, jokes. We were always the punchline of everything. And added to that, of course, the Britain that I grew up in the 1980s, as well as being deeply homophobic and transphobic, was also deeply racist. So Justin Fashanu was against so many things all the way through his career. The fact that he enjoyed such a good career at so many clubs is testament to the strength of him as a person. But the problem is that sort of with a lifetime of the abuse that any of us faced back then, and being in the public eye, he was always going to struggle with things. And when you add to that cultural difficulties from his African heritage, which I know played a big role in him struggling with his identity, it's just unfortunate that he couldn't get the support that he needed. And I just hope and pray that any player that's in that position now would actually find someone to talk to, and find someone to actually open up to, because everyone that I've worked with in football is well, not everyone. Majority of people that I've worked with in football are very open to diversity, especially around sexuality. And I think it's important that we remember all the great work that's been done in Justin's name since he passed, and the great work of the foundation and others who just continue to build on his legacy to make sure that no one else goes through the same things that he went through.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that means that we have now come to the end of the show, which means it's a goodbye from myself, Hannah Phillips, and our guests, Tommy Snipe and Sophie Cook. Goodbye.